Today I am going to be presenting about Nosferatu, the 2024 film. In this presentation, I'll be exploring Robert Eggers' 2024 film Nosferatu, which serves as a dark, atmospheric reimagining of one of cinema's most iconic Gothic monsters. Rather than just retelling the story of a vampire, Eggers' version brings us deep into the heart of the Gothic tradition, drawing from literary, historical, psychological, and philosophical currents that span over a century. My goal is to break down how Nosferatu not only fits within the Gothic genre but also expands it, transforming traditional Gothic tropes to resonate with modern fears and aesthetics. By the end, I hope to give you a clearer sense of how the Gothic continues to evolve in the contemporary media and why it continues to fascinate us. Let me quickly outline our key objectives. First, we'll identify the literary and cultural sources that shaped Eggers' film, especially its ties to Gothic fiction and early cinema. Second, we'll explore how the film's historical setting, visual style, and narrative reflect real-world cultural and philosophical concerns. I'll walk you through several classic Gothic elements, like the grotesque, isolation, decay, and madness as they appear in the film. Finally, we'll examine the film's broader significance, including what it suggests about modern anxieties. These themes will be tied back to course material, and I'll also be inviting your thoughts and questions as we go. Nosferatu 2024 is part of a long Gothic lineage. Its most direct inspiration is F.W. Murnau's 1922 silent film Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror, which was an unauthorized adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula from 1897. Stoker's novel established the modern vampire myth, but Murnau reimagined it with a more grotesque and pestilential figure, Count Orlok, who replaced Dracula's aristocratic seductiveness with something more primal and eerie. Eggers' version follows Murnau more than Stoker. Orlok here is verminous, hairless, with elongated limbs and fingernails, more like a walking corpse than a romantic anti-hero. This aligns with earlier vampire folklore from Eastern Europe, where vampires were bloated, diseased corpses rather than suave predators. Literary tropes like the monstrous double, the femme fragile, the corruption of innocence, and the forbidden knowledge are all present and reworked for contemporary audiences. We also have supernatural evil, doomed romance. We have villains, dreams and nightmares, horror and terror, and the classic haunted or eerie castle. Egger also draws the Gothic literary tradition of the uncanny, the idea that something can be simultaneously familiar and alien, which is a key component of how horror operates in both literature and film. The film is set in 1838 Germany, a period of growing tension between Enlightenment rationality and the remnants of pre-scientific superstition. It's also a time when epidemics such as cholera and tuberculosis were ravaging Europe and medical understanding was limited. Eggers uses the fear of contagion and plague as both a literal and metaphorical threat. Orlok brings rats and sickness with him, and his arrival causes panic, quarantine, and a breakdown of social order. The town devolves into fear, violence, and desperation, paralleling real reactions to disease throughout history, as we all may know, with COVID from 2020. Visually, Eggers borrows from German Expressionism, especially Murnau's era, films that use stylized shadows, distorted perspective, and intense contrast to reflect psychological unease. He also draws on Romanticism, which celebrated emotion, nature, and the sublime. The Romantic Gothic often emphasized the fragility of civilization and the idea that beneath our polite society lies something primal and uncontrollable. This connection between aesthetic form and cultural fear is crucial. Eggers doesn't just tell a Gothic story. He immerses us in a Gothic worldview where nature is hostile, the unknown is terrifying, and the institutions can't save us. Psychologically, Nosferatu operates on a deeply subconscious level. The vampire here is not just a monster, but a metaphor for repressed emotion and the death instinct. Ellen, the female protagonist, begins to unravel emotionally as she becomes aware of Orlok's presence. She experiences dreams, hallucinations, and visions, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. This echoes Gothic heroines like Lucy and Mina in Dracula, or even earlier figures like Madeleine Usher in Poe's work, women caught between agency and victimhood, often serving as mirrors for male fear. On a philosophical level, the film suggests that evil is not necessarily a matter of personal choice or even supernatural punishment. Rather, it is an impersonable force, a cosmic indifference. Orlok does not speak, explain, or reason. He exists to consume, contaminate, and destroy. He's closer to what philosophers like Freud or Lacan would call a projection of the unconscious, a death drive, an embodiment of Thanatos. In that sense, Nosferatu becomes an exploration of humanity's confrontation with the void, the unknowable, the irrational, and the sublime horror of existence without meaning. This is deeply Gothic, the terror not of monsters, but of what the monster represents in ourselves. The film is visually and thematically saturated with Gothic elements. We see familiar motifs, the crumbling castle, the eerie mist, moonlit forests, locked doors, and forbidden spaces. These create a sense of claustrophobia and isolation, which are essential for Gothic terror. The themes are equally classic. There's an obsessive fixation on death, the supernatural, and madness. Ellen functions as the Gothic heroine, delicate, intuitive, and eventually self-sacrificing to stop Orlok. Her fate ties into the doomed woman trope, where female characters suffer to preserve societal order or at least delay its collapse. Orlok is the grotesque other, not just monstrous in body, but symbolic of social and metaphysical disruption. He doesn't just threaten individual lives, he threatens the idea of order, family, and morality and reason. The Gothic often deals with liminal spaces, borders between life and death, sanity and madness, and Nosferatu navigates those lines masterfully. Eggers' film is an homage to silent cinema, particularly Murnau's Nosferatu, but with a modern cinematic vocabulary. He relies heavily on the expressionist lighting to evoke dread. Shadows don't just decorate scenes, they seem to take on lives of their own, stretching unnaturally across walls and ceilings, implying a supernatural presence that lingers even when Orlok is off screen. Importantly, the film avoids CGI and modern horror conventions. Eggers favors practical effects and period-accurate costume and production design. This gives the film a lived-in texture that makes it feel historical and immediate. Sound design is minimalist, often dropping into silence to highlight dread. The musical score, when used, evokes melancholy rather than suspense. Symbolism is key here. Rats evoke both plague and chaos, mirrors, or their absence thereof, question what's real. Doorways and arches become thresholds between the known and the unknown. These visuals don't just support the narrative, they tell it. To conclude, Nosferatu 2024 is a powerful modern Gothic film that draws on a vast network of literary, cultural, historical, and philosophical influences. It revisits the vampire myth not through the lens of romance or empowerment, as many contemporary vampire stories do, but through disease, decay, and death. Eggers' Orlok is not a villain we can understand or defeat, he's a force of unreason. The film's insistence on silence, shadow, and slowness mirrors the Gothic's core purpose, not to thrill but to unsettle. It reminds us that horror is often most effective when it's quiet, patient, and deeply symbolic. More than just a remake, Nosferatu is meditation on the persistence of fear in the human imagination. It speaks to our historical past and our psychological present, and most of all, it proves that the Gothic as a genre still has much to say about who we are and what we're afraid of. Here are the works cited, referenced in today's presentation. These include the film itself, its cinematic and literary predecessors, and critical sources like David Punter's The Gothic, which helped frame some of the philosophical ideas I discussed. I've also drawn from our course lectures and readings, especially on German Romanticism, the definitions of typical Gothic tropes. Thank you very much for listening.